Before Egypt, before Greece, before Rome, there was Sumer. Who were the Sumerians? How did they transform from wandering bands of hunter-gatherers into the architects of the first cities? And why, after rising to greatness, did they vanish, leaving behind only shattered clay tablets and silent ziggurats? The dawn of settlements, 7000 BCE to 4000 BCE. Before Egypt, before Greece, before Rome, there was Sumer. Long before the world's great empires rose and fell, an ancient people transformed the land between two rivers into the cradle of civilization. But who were the Sumerians? How did they transition from wandering tribes to the first city builders in human history? And why, after centuries of dominance, did they vanish, leaving behind only fragments of their once great society? Their story begins long before the first kings, long before writing, in a time when the land was untamed and humanity stood at the threshold of something new. 7,000 years before the first Sumerian cities rose, the people of Mesopotamia lived as nomads, moving with the seasons, following herds, and gathering what the land provided. For thousands of years, this had been the way of life, until something changed. The rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, carried more than just water. Each year when they flooded, they left behind thick layers of fertile silt, rich enough to grow crops in abundance. Here, for the first time in human history, people began to stay in one place. Settlers learned to control the waters, carving channels into the earth and guiding the rivers toward their fields. They built small villages, harvested grain, and stored food for the future. But their success brought new challenges. These early farmers were not just peaceful cultivators. They had to defend their land, their water, and their way of life. Disputes over irrigation led to conflict. Rival groups sabotaged each other's canals, stole harvests, and fought for control of the most fertile land. Settlers learned to control the waters, carving channels into the earth and guiding the rivers toward their fields. They built small villages, harvested grain, and stored food for the future. But their success brought new challenges. These early farmers were not just peaceful cultivators. They had to defend their land, their water, and their way of life. Disputes over irrigation led to conflict. Rival groups sabotaged each other's canals, stole harvests, and fought for control of the most fertile land. This was the beginning of something greater than any single tribe or settlement. The first steps toward civilization had been taken. Sumer was on the horizon. The first villages and temples. The land between the rivers was no longer empty. Over generations, scattered farming communities grew into villages, and among them, one name would echo through history: Eridu. It is said that Eridu was not just the first city, but the place where civilization itself was born. The Sumerians believed the gods had chosen this land, that it was here they bestowed the gifts of order, knowledge, and rule upon humanity. But was Eridu truly the first city, or was it something more? The land between the rivers was no longer empty. Over generations, scattered farming communities grew into villages, and among them, one name would echo through history: Eridu. It is said that Eridu was not just the first city, but the place where civilization itself was born. The Sumerians believed the gods had chosen this land, that it was here they bestowed the gift of order, knowledge, and rule upon humanity. But was Eridu truly the first city, or was it something more? A symbol of the moment when man and myth first intertwined. At its heart stood the temple of Enki, god of wisdom, water, and creation. Unlike the crude huts of early settlements, this was something entirely different. A sacred structure, carefully built and expanded over generations. It was the first sign that these people were no longer just surviving. They were shaping a world of their own design. But why here? Why Eridu? What made this place so special that later Sumerians would call it the cradle of kingship? Historical sources and expert insights. For centuries, the origins of civilization were buried beneath the sands of time, until modern archaeology began unearthing the impossible. In the ruins of Eridu, a city the Sumerians themselves called the first city of men, archaeologists uncovered something astonishing. A temple buried beneath layers of time, dating back over 7,000 years. This was no ordinary settlement. It wasn't just the remains of an early village. It was something far greater. The birthplace of organized worship, a city built for the gods. But why here? Why in this desolate stretch of southern Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates meet? The answer lay in water. The first Sumerians weren't just farmers. They were engineers of the divine. They learned to control the floods, carve irrigation canals into the earth. And in doing so, they bent nature itself to their will. With each passing century, their settlements grew larger. Eridu, Uruk, and names that would echo through history. And then, something even greater happened. In Uruk, archaeologists discovered the remnants of a system more complex than anyone had imagined. Administrative buildings, massive storehouses, and the earliest signs of writing. These were not simple villages anymore. These were cities, bound together by something far deeper than just trade or survival. At the heart of it all was a singular idea. The gods had given civilization to mankind. According to Sumerian mythology, Enki, the god of wisdom, descended from the heavens and gifted humanity the me. Divine decrees containing the foundations of culture, law, craftsmanship, and kingship. Without them, civilization could not exist. But the Sumerians did not believe they had simply invented these things. They believed they were bestowed upon them. And so, the first cities were built not just for men, but for the gods themselves. Because as archaeologists dug deeper beneath the ruins of Eridu and Uruk, they found something unexpected. Layers of civilization stacked upon layers, stretching further back than the Sumerians themselves. And what lay beneath suggested that history was even older than we thought. Uruk, the first great city, 3,500 BCE, 2,900 BCE. At first, it was nothing more than a cluster of simple settlements along the Euphrates. But by 3,500 BCE, something unprecedented happened. Uruk was no longer just a city. It was a force. Its vast temple complexes rose above the plains, dedicated to the sky god Anu and the goddess Inanna. Its streets swelled with merchants, artisans, and scribes. Unlike anything before it, Uruk had become a center of power, wealth, and influence, shaping the very idea of civilization itself. But how did it rise so quickly? The answer lay in trade. From the mountains of Afghanistan came shimmering lapis lazuli, its deep blue hue coveted by kings and priests. Copper arrived from the distant mines of Anatolia, melted, and cast into tools that gave Uruk its technological edge. Timber from the Levant, prized and rare, became the beams that supported towering structures. Each of these resources came from lands hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles away. And yet they all funneled into Uruk. Why? At the heart of it all was a name that still echoes through time. Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh paints him as a demigod, a warrior king who sought immortality and defied the gods. But was he merely a legend, or was there a real ruler behind the myth? Ancient records hint at a king named Bilgamesh, who may have reigned over Uruk during its golden age. His rule, if real, would have placed him at the helm of the most powerful city of his time. But the true enigma remains. If Gilgamesh was real, why did his story become the greatest legend of the ancient world? The answer lies in a single, extraordinary discovery: the invention of writing, cuneiform, 3200 BCE. It began with numbers, simple marks pressed into clay, recording grain, sheep, and trade. But something remarkable happened in Sumer. The marks evolved. They became symbols, then words, then entire sentences. And with that, the world's first known writing system was born, cuneiform. For the first time in human history, memory was no longer tied to the fragile whispers of oral tradition. The Sumerians had found a way to preserve knowledge beyond a single lifetime. But why? What force drove them to create this revolutionary system? The answer lay in power. As Uruk and its sister cities grew, so did the need to control their vast wealth. Priests and officials needed precise records: how much grain was stored, how many workers were paid, how much silver was owed. Writing became the foundation of bureaucracy, the silent engine of an empire. But its influence did not stop there. Over time, cuneiform leapt beyond mere transactions. It became poetry, myth, and legend. And from the clay tablets of Sumer came one of the greatest literary works of all time, the Epic of Gilgamesh. A tale of gods and kings, love and loss, ambition and mortality. But here's the most astonishing part. The epic wasn't just a story. It was a question so profound that its echoes would reach across the millennia, challenging everything we thought we knew about the human condition. What was it? And why does it still haunt us today? The power of writing. The ancient scribes of Sumer could not have known what they had unleashed. What began as a tool of commerce, numbers pressed into clay, soon became something far greater. The first contracts, the first laws, the first recorded stories. But buried within those tablets is a revelation few truly grasp. Writing did not just change civilization. It created it. Take the Gilgamesh tablets. More than an epic, they reveal an evolving consciousness. A civilization asking, for the first time, what it means to be human. In these lines of cuneiform, we see kings struggle with fate, gods clash with men, and the inescapable fear of death. Was this just a story, or was it something more? The economic texts, by contrast, seem mundane: grain tallies, labor wages, land sales. But these records reveal something just as profound: the birth of accountability. With writing, power was no longer absolute. It could be challenged, verified, questioned. The pen, even in its infancy, was beginning to rival the sword. Yet there is one final truth, hidden in the very structure of cuneiform itself. Unlike spoken language, which fades with breath, written words endure. They cross generations, shape minds, outlive empires. Without writing, Sumer might have been just another forgotten civilization, lost beneath the sands. Instead, their voices still speak to us, thousands of years later. But the greatest mystery: the Sumerians never saw writing as merely a tool. To them, it was something sacred, a gift from the gods, a power that carried dangers of its own, and history would soon prove them right. Government, law, and kingship, the birth of order. At first, there were no kings, only councils. In the early days of Sumer, governance was a shared responsibility, a delicate balance of power between elders, warriors, and priests. Decisions were made in assembly halls, where the voices of the people still held weight. But power, like the rivers of Mesopotamia, could not be contained forever. The priest-kings, NC, began as caretakers of the temples, the intermediaries between gods and men. But over time, their role expanded. They oversaw land, trade, and law, becoming rulers in all but name. And with them came the first real test of civilization: control. Yet how does one rule a city of thousands? How do you prevent chaos? The answer was written in clay. Long before Hammurabi, before the laws that shaped Babylon, there was the Code of Ur-Nammu, the world's first known legal code, etched into tablets over 4,000 years ago. It set the foundations for justice, punishments for theft, protections for the weak, and, for the first time, the idea that laws were not just dictated by kings, but written for all to see. But there's something in these laws that few discuss. Unlike later codes that thrived on brutality, Ur-Nammu's laws show a civilization attempting something radical: justice tempered with mercy. Fines often replaced mutilation. Even in a world of harsh realities, Sumerians believed law should serve not just power, but the people. Yet even as their legal system advanced, a new force was rising, one that would change governance forever. The age of councils was ending. The age of kings had begun. Technological and cultural achievements. The dawn of innovation. It began with a simple, yet profound idea: movement made easy. In the dusty workshops of Sumer, an unknown craftsman carved a circular shape from wood. It wasn't for war, nor for art, but for something far more practical: transportation. The wheel, one of humanity's greatest inventions, was not born on the battlefield, but in the fields, attached to carts that transformed agriculture and trade. But the Sumerians didn't stop at the wheel. They looked to the skies. Observing the heavens, they noticed patterns, cycles of the moon, movements of the stars. But rather than merely gazing in awe, they calculated. From this they created something astonishing: the base 60 numerical system. This is why we have 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle, a legacy that still shapes our world today. Yet among their most overlooked achievements was something far more human: the creation of the first schools. To control a growing civilization, knowledge had to be preserved. Writing was no longer just for the gods and rulers. It became a skill, a profession. The first scribes were trained in Edubas, the world's first recorded schools. Their students, young boys from elite families, endured grueling days memorizing and copying symbols. Their hands blistered from pressing reed styluses into clay, but their work laid the foundation for administration, literature, and science, and with knowledge came power, the ability to record, calculate, and predict turned the Sumerians into masters of innovation. But their greatest invention was yet to come, one that would ensure their civilization endured long after their cities had turned to dust. The blueprint of civilization, Sumerian urban planning. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, designed with precision that would shock even modern architects. Sumer wasn't just a land of cities. It was a land of organized cities. At first glance, ancient settlements may seem like clusters of mud brick homes. But beneath the dust lay a plan, a master design that dictated where people lived, how they worked, and even how they worshipped. Historians were stunned when they uncovered the meticulous layout of cities like Uruk and Lagash. Streets were not haphazard. They were carefully placed to manage foot traffic and trade. Canals snaked through the city, supplying fresh water to homes and markets. Residential districts formed near temples, where the hum of daily life intertwined with religion and commerce. At the heart of each city, towering above all, stood the ziggurat, not just a temple, but the very center of life itself. It was where gods and rulers intersected, where politics and faith became indistinguishable. But something even more astonishing lay beneath their feet. Beneath the streets, an underground drainage system carried away waste and floodwaters. The Sumerians had developed one of the earliest known sanitation systems, ensuring their cities didn't just grow, but thrived. And yet, what truly set them apart was their governance of space. They zoned their cities. There were areas specifically for administration, others for craftsmen, and still others for religious worship. It was urban planning, centuries ahead of its time, a vision that would later inspire civilizations from the Indus Valley to ancient Rome. But how did they maintain order in such vast and complex cities? That secret lay not in their buildings, but in their laws, rules so foundational that even today, echoes of them shape our world. The first wars in history, when cities became battlegrounds. For centuries, the great city-states of Sumer thrived, each a jewel of civilization, each a powerhouse of trade, faith, and culture. But prosperity bred ambition, and ambition led to war. This was not mere raiding. This was not disorganized violence. This was something the world had never seen before. Organized warfare on a grand scale between city-states locked in an unending cycle of conquest and revenge. Uruk, Lagash, and Kish, these were not just cities. They were rivals, each vying for dominance over the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, control over the life-giving rivers, the trade routes, the farmlands. Everything was at stake. Then, a conflict erupted that would set the precedent for all wars to come. It was the first recorded war in human history, Lagash versus Umma. It began with a simple dispute over land that held the wealth of generations, land that had been contested for decades. The king of Lagash, Eannatum, would not stand idly by. He led his soldiers to battle, wielding spears and bronze axes, fighting under the divine protection of Ningirsu, their war god. But what made this war different from the tribal skirmishes of the past was how it was remembered. Eannatum commemorated his victory on the Stele of the Vultures, a chilling artifact that still survives today. The carvings show Sumerian warriors in tight battle formations, shields locked, advancing as one, disciplined, methodical. It was the dawn of organized military tactics. Yet war was not just about the battlefield. With conquest came tribute, political alliances, and shifting balances of power. City after city learned that survival meant more than wealth. It meant dominance. But Sumer's greatest wars were still to come. Because beyond the walls of these warring city-states, a far greater power was rising, one that would change Sumer forever. The rise of Sargon and the First Empire in history. For centuries, Sumer had been a land of warring city-states, each fighting for dominance, each believing it was destined to rule. But in the end, none of them would claim ultimate victory, because from the north, a force unlike any before was preparing to descend upon Sumer. His name was Sargon of Akkad, and he would change history forever. We know little about Sargon's early life, but what survives is something astonishing. His story is told not in dry records, but in a legend, a tale of a child placed in a basket and sent down a river, raised in obscurity, destined for greatness. A story that thousands of years later would echo in the myths of Moses. But unlike a legend, Sargon was very real. And when he rose to power, he did what no one else had ever done. He did not seek to rule just one city. He sought all of them. One by one, the great city-states fell. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Kish, until there was no one left to challenge him. For the first time in history, the fractured lands of Sumer were united not under a city, but an empire. This was something new, something the world had never seen. For centuries, power had been tied to the gods, to temples, to priest kings who ruled with divine authority. But Sargon ruled as a conqueror, not a servant of the gods. He placed loyal Akkadian governors over the Sumerian cities, reshaped administration, and controlled trade from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. Sumer had given birth to civilization. Now it had given birth to empire. But how does an empire, the first of its kind, sustain its power? How does a man like Sargon hold together a realm that had never before been unified? And more importantly, how long could it last? With the rise of Sargon and the Akkadian Empire, Sumerian civilization was forever changed. But was it an evolution, a grand step forward, or was it the beginning of the end? Historians are divided. On the one hand, Akkadian rule brought unprecedented stability. Trade flourished as never before, stretching from the mountains of Anatolia to the shores of the Indus Valley. A new administrative system linked cities together under a single authority. For the first time in history, laws and governance extended beyond a single city-state. But beneath this unity Cracks were forming. Sumer, once a land of independent city-states, was now ruled by outsiders. Akkadian became the language of administration, pushing Sumerian into decline. Power shifted from the great temple complexes to a centralized imperial court. Many Sumerians saw Akkadian rule not as progress, but as an occupation. And then there was the environment. For centuries, Sumer had thrived by harnessing the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates. But over time, something changed. A slow, creeping disaster, one that even the might of an empire could not stop. And then came the rebellions. Sargon's empire had been built by war, and in the end, it was war that would undo it. By the time of Sargon's grandsons, the Akkadian grip on Sumer had begun to slip. One by one, the great cities rose against their foreign rulers. In the north, barbarian invaders, the Gutians, swept down from the mountains, striking at the empire's weakened heart. Akkadian rule collapsed. But was this the end of Sumer? Or would its people once again find a way to rise? When the earth turned against them, the slow collapse of Sumer, the fall of the Akkadian Empire left Sumerian city-states free once more. But the world they inherited was not the same. For centuries, Sumer had flourished, its fields fed by the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates. But what had once been a blessing was now turning into a curse. By 2100 BCE, farmers in once prosperous regions struggled to grow even the hardiest of crops. Wheat, a staple of the Sumerian diet, could no longer thrive. The people switched to barley, which was more salt-resistant, but even that was not enough. With famine came desperation. Trade routes that had once brought gold, copper, and lapis lazuli now carried something far less welcome: conflict. City-states, weakened by hunger, turned on each other. Kings who had once ruled vast, powerful domains now fought to control a handful of struggling villages. And as the cities declined, so too did the economy. The great temples that had once been centers of commerce now sat half-empty, their priests struggling to collect offerings from a population that could barely feed itself. But the Sumerians did not give up. Not yet. In the city of a final attempt was made to restore order. A leader rose, determined to defy the forces of nature and history itself. A last golden age was coming. But would it be enough? The strangers from the mountains, the Gutian invasion, and the last days of Sumer. For centuries, the Sumerians had weathered storms, famine, infighting, the rise and fall of empires. But now, a new threat loomed beyond their borders, one they did not expect and could not prepare for. In the mountains to the northeast, an unknown people had been watching. They were the Gutians, a nomadic, warlike society whose origins remain shrouded in mystery. Unlike the city-dwelling Sumerians, they lived off the land, moving with their herds. And when Sumer weakened, they saw their chance. By 2200 BCE, Gutian raiders had begun to strike the fringes of Sumerian lands. At first, they were little more than a nuisance, bands of warriors attacking trade caravans and isolated villages. But as Sumer continued to decline, the Gutians grew bolder. Then came the final blow. In 2004 BCE, they descended upon the last great stronghold of Sumerian civilization. The city's king, Ibbi-Sin, tried to resist. He called upon what was left of his armies, fortified his walls, and pleaded for allies. But help never came. The Gutians overwhelmed Ur's defenses. The city burned. Its temples were looted. The royal palace was reduced to rubble. Ibbi-Sin himself was captured and led away in chains, a tragic end for the last ruler of a once mighty people. With the fall of Ur, the long and storied history of Sumer came to an end. The world moved on. New empires rose. The Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Persians. They built upon what Sumer had created, adopting its writing, its laws, its gods. But the Sumerians themselves, those who had once ruled the land between the rivers, faded into history. Yet their legacy never disappeared. Every time we divide an hour into 60 minutes, we honor the Sumerian mathematicians who first conceived the base 60 system. Every written word, every legal code, every city that thrives today owes something to them. Sumer was the first great civilization, and though it is gone, it was never truly lost. The perfect storm, how Sumer fell. Sumer did not collapse overnight. No empire truly does. Instead, it unraveled, slowly, painfully, until there was nothing left to hold it together. Long before the Gutians stormed Ur, Sumer had already been fighting a losing battle. It was not just war that weakened it, but something far older, more relentless. The land itself was turning against them. For centuries, the Sumerians had tamed the Tigris and Euphrates, bending the rivers to their will. They dug canals, built irrigation systems, and turned barren land into farmland. But success came at a cost. The same waters that had nourished their cities carried salt from the soil. Each year, the earth grew less fertile. Crops withered. Fields once rich with barley became useless. By the time of the Akkadian Empire, this crisis was no longer theoretical, it was a reality. Archaeological records show that between 2200 and 2100 BCE, Sumer suffered a period of extreme drought. The rivers dried. Famine gripped the land. Trade routes collapsed. Desperate city-states turned against each other, fighting for what little remained. And then came the final blow. Foreign invaders. The Gutians were not the first outsiders to test Sumer's strength. The Elamites had attacked before, so had the Akkadians, absorbing Sumer into their empire. But this time, there was no strong king to fight back, no great city left unscathed. By the time Ur fell in 2004 BCE, Sumer was already a ghost of its former self. The cities were weakened, the fields barren, the people starving. When the invaders came, there was nothing left to save. Yet, though Sumer itself vanished, it never truly died. Its influence lived on, carried by the civilizations that followed. The Babylonians would rise where Sumer had fallen. Their gods, their laws, their stories, all borrowed from the Sumerians. Even today, echoes of Sumer remain. The first great civilization did not last forever, but what it created did. Sumer may have fallen, but its legacy never faded. Long after its cities crumbled, its influence shaped the very foundations of civilization itself. The world's first written laws, the Code of Ur-Nammu, set a precedent for justice that later civilizations, from the Babylonians to the Romans, would build upon. The idea that rulers must follow laws, that contracts must be honored, that justice must be written down, these were Sumerian innovations. Their language, Sumerian, vanished from speech, but not from history. It became the foundation for Akkadian, Babylonian, and countless tongues that followed. Even today, scholars studying ancient texts owe their knowledge to the first written language ever recorded, cuneiform, invented in the temples and palaces of Sumer. Their myths and legends, once carved into clay, outlived their cities. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written in Sumerian before being adapted by later civilizations, became one of the oldest surviving works of literature. Its themes, friendship, mortality, the search for meaning, echo in myths and religions across the world. The story of a great flood, of a man seeking eternal life, of divine wrath and mercy. These ideas, first imagined in Sumer, found their way into the stories of later cultures, from Babylon to the Hebrews, from Greece to modern storytelling. Even time itself bears their mark. The Sumerians divided the hour into 60 minutes, the circle into 360 degrees, a system we still use today. Their advances in mathematics, astronomy, and architecture shaped the way future civilizations measured the world around them. They were the first to build cities, to create laws, to write stories. And though their names, Uruk, Lagash, may not be spoken as often as Rome or Athens, their influence runs deeper. They were the first, and in many ways, they still remain. And so, though the bricks of Ur and the towering ziggurats of Uruk have crumbled into dust, the echoes of Sumer have never faded. Their words, pressed into clay, became the foundation of written history. Their laws, inscribed for all to see, shaped the way we define justice. Their myths, told and retold, became the roots of the stories we still tell today. The Sumerians did not merely build cities. They built the blueprint for civilization itself. Their knowledge flowed into Babylon, into Persia, into Greece, and Rome, carried forward by scribes, scholars, and kings who never forgot where it all began. Their measures of time, their calculations of the stars, their understanding of the human experience, love, war, ambition, the fleeting nature of life, still resonate in the modern world. Their names may not be spoken in everyday life. Their temples may have long since sunk beneath the sands, but their influence endures, quietly shaping the world around us. Though the cities of Sumer have turned to dust, their legacy endures in every written word, every law, and every story passed down through time. This was not just the dawn of civilization. This was the beginning of us. For centuries, the Sumerian language lay buried beneath the sands of time, until scholars, piece by piece, resurrected its forgotten words. But how did they do it? And what mysteries remain? Sumerian is a language isolate, meaning it has no known relatives. Unlike Akkadian or later languages that evolved from it, Sumerian stands alone. We deciphered it through bilingual inscriptions. Akkadian scribes wrote translations alongside Sumerian texts, much like the Rosetta Stone helped decode Egyptian hieroglyphs. Yet even today, parts of Sumerian remain a puzzle. Was it spoken with tonal variations? Did dialects vary across city-states? Some grammatical rules still elude us, leaving gaps in our full understanding. Sumer's influence didn't vanish. It echoed through time. The Babylonian priesthood inherited Sumerian hymns and rituals, preserving their religious traditions. Even in Greek mythology, we see traces. Zeus's thunderbolts mirror Enlil, the storm god of Sumer. Beyond religion, Sumerians shaped how we measure time. Their base 60 system gave us the 60-second minute, the 360-degree circle, and early astronomical charts. They tracked the heavens with astonishing accuracy. The movements of Venus recorded by Sumerian scribes were later refined by Babylonian and Greek astronomers. Without them, modern astronomy would not exist as we know it. The Sumerians may have vanished, but their legacy is everywhere. In the words we write, the numbers we use, and the stars we still chart today. The echoes of the past still shape our world today. If you want to uncover more forgotten civilizations, lost empires, and untold histories, make sure to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep history alive. So don't miss out on the next great story from the ancient world.